And thank you for having me in Toronto. This is awesome. So I usually give a little talk. Just I've gotten enough questions about my books over the years. Now it's been more than 1 year, years. That I sort of know what people ask. So I'll just talk a little about like how they came to be and who the heck I am and why I might be on this small stage. And then I'll turn it over to you guys and you can ask me questions and we'll just go from there. So I wrote Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children was my first book, and that came out in 2011. I started in 2009, and it was an accident. I didn't really mean to be a fiction writer. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be a fiction writer. It's all I wanted to do. I wanted to be Stephen King and C.S. Lewis and all of those things sort of wrapped up in one. And then I discovered movies in like the 8th grade, and completely retooled my focus, and I just wanted to be a writer-director, and I got obsessed. And I ended up going to film school, and then I was living in LA, graduated from film school. I had my degree, I had my little screenplay that I'd written, and I was going around town and knocking on doors and, trying to get things to happen, and nothing was really happening. But I had written my way through film school. Film school's expensive, and to sort of to defray the cost, and because I liked it, I'd been doing freelance writing. So I was writing for magazines here and there when I could get the work, and mostly I was blogging for Mental Floss, they're a magazine and a blog, and I see heads nodding now. But back when I was working for Mental Floss, no one knew what it was, or would have nodded their head when I said its name. It was very small, but it was fun. I could do whatever I wanted, and every day I just had to blog about weird facts, and it was good at, like parties. I could be like, let's talk about, the endangered animals in Greenland or whatever. I could list lots of lists, strange lists and weird facts. But through that, the guys who ran Mental Floss knew some people who ran a publishing company in Philadelphia called Quark Books. And I didn't know anything about publishing at the time, but most book publishers are in New York, Philadelphia. I didn't know they had any book publishers, so it didn't seem weird to me at the time. And they said they are looking for someone to write a book about Sherlock Holmes. What do you know about Sherlock Holmes? And I was like, writing a book sounds like fun. Say yes. And I was like, I know everything about Sherlock Holmes. Sign me up. So they asked me for a little sample, and I gave them one, and then I read everything I could about Sherlock Holmes in a really short amount of time, and crammed, sort of like the SAT was tomorrow and I hadn't studied. And I wrote this book about how to be an awesome consulting detective like Sherlock Holmes for Quark. It was like how to do all the Sherlock Holmesy things, like pick a lock and fake your own death and be a master of disguise and survive a fall off of a waterfall and all the things he does. And it was lots of fun, but it didn't change my life. I was like, okay, well I did that, and there's a book on a shelf in a bookstore with my name on it. That's pretty cool. But now I'm going to go back to trying to be like screenwriter and get my screenplay bought by somebody, and so still, like, all of these things in my life had been saying, like, maybe you should be writing books. Like, you seem to be having more success doing that. Hello, Like, but I was still pushing really hard against this movie door. And then I started to collect photos, old photos. It is as random as it sounds. There are flea markets and swap meets throughout Southern California. I don't know why, but we love junk, especially in LA. Vintage crap, we just love it. And the largest swap meet anywhere, as far as I know, is in Pasadena at the Rose Bowl, where they have the Rose Bowl parade every Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving. I get to have 2 Thanksgivings this year. I'm really excited. This is like cheating. We do this every year. So I was there and just wandering around looking for cheap furniture for my apartment, because you can buy anything at the Rose Bowl swap meet. And I found a man who had a booth of photographs for sale, old vintage snapshots like your grandmother would have, except they weren't anyone I was related to. And he had clearly gone through tens of thousands of other pictures to find the best ones that he could find that he thought were sort of uniquely beautiful or artistic in some way, and he had, like a museum curator, picked out his favorite ones and put absurd prices on them, like $10, and I was like, what? for a tiny snapshot, but then I started looking through them and I was like, that's amazing, that's really beautiful. And so I gave him all my money and took as many as I could, because I've always loved photography. I've always been sort of an amateur photographer, and I loved the like old street photographers of the 50s and 60s. But I was a student. I could never collect anything. It never occurred to me to collect art. That was something rich people did. But this stuff I could afford, and I thought these are like little sort of found masterpieces. Maybe no one will ever recognize this as a masterpiece, but me. But one of the first things I found, it wasn't even that beautiful. It was just sort of poignant. It was a picture of a blank wall, and it was like blurry and out of focus. It was a bad photo on the front, at least, and on the back, it was written in someone's handwriting. It said, "The place where Dorothy found a baby girl on Christmas Day, 1962," or something. And I was like, wow, that little caption just invested this really banal image with so much meaning. That's so interesting. So that's where I started, and I would go back every week and bug Leonard for more pictures, and he told me there was a whole underground collection of people who loved old pictures and for years had been collecting them very seriously, and had thousands and thousands of them, big collections, and that if I wanted more I should just go talk to them. And he gave me some names, and I started to go talk to these people, and I wasn't sure if they would be weirdos or like art people or people who never left their basements, but they were like very interesting, very cool people. Most of them had like an artistic eye, and most of them were like into really specific things. The photo collectors would be like, I like, pictures of people on their honeymoons. Okay, so you're the honeymoon picture guy, great. Or some people would say, I like pictures of, circus freaks or something, so they'd be the circus freak picture guy. I just kind of liked anything that I thought was interesting, but in the beginning, they like gravitated to me, these sort of eerie pictures of kids from at least 60, if not 70, 80, 90, 100 years ago, who just had a sort of like oldie-timey look, and they were staring at the camera in a sort of way that was creepy, and they were holding like big oversized teddy bears with their heads falling off, and something about them just, punctured my consciousness, and I was like, I'm gonna have a nightmare. So I should probably own that, which doesn't make sense, or it did to me at the time, but now it doesn't. So I started getting this collection of old pictures, and only after I'd been collecting them for 6 months or something did it occur to me to contact my editor at Cork, who I'd done the Sherlock Holmes handbook for, and say, hey, I've got these pictures. I think it could be something, because Cork is not a publisher that does normal books. They don't do novels or anything. They do a little bit now, but they do graphical type books. They do really interesting, very designy, off the wall stuff. And so I thought, well, this is something graphical. I don't know what it is though. Maybe it's like a Halloween calendar, I thought. I don't know. I'm just gonna give them to my editor, and somewhere in my brain I thought maybe there's stories here. I would love to tell stories about these pictures, but I didn't even quite have the courage to suggest it to him, because they didn't do stuff like that. And I had never written a novel before, but to his credit, my editor was the one who said, have you ever thought about writing a book and maybe weaving the pictures through the narrative somehow? And I was like, yes, but I never thought you'd think the same thing, so okay, sure. You pay me to do that? Because I've never done that before. I didn't actually say out loud. So that's where the first book came from. It was just sort of a, why don't you go try to do this? My editor took a chance on me, and I went off and came up with the plot and the characters, and I immediately realized I needed a ton more pictures, and I set off on this journey that was the creation of that book. And it took about a year, 6 months to write a really bad draft that I had to throw away, and then 6 months to rewrite it good. And that's what's between the covers. And then the second book took me a lot longer to write. That came out in January. And so it's been this sort of interesting, organic process of creating the stories around the pictures, and the stories becoming much more important than the pictures. In the beginning, the pictures came first. And that's where the ideas for who the characters were and what the story was sort of came from, these little images, these seeds of ideas. But then very quickly the story got big and ballooned in size, and the characters sort of became real to me at least, and the pictures became a kind of, just an illustrative like byproduct, something I had to find to keep it all together, but not the primary thing anymore. So it's been an interesting shift through writing the first book and then the second, and now I'm in the middle of writing the third, to have them sort of grow. I almost think of it as like the trunks of two trees that are sort of growing in and around each other. Like, you can't really take the words and the pictures apart. They need each other, but in some places one is much more dominant, in some places the other is more dominant and important. And I don't know. It's something I'm figuring out as I go, because there's not a lot of models for me to look at and be like, well, he did it that way, because I don't know anyone else who did. There are some other examples. There are some great like nonfiction and experimental fiction things, like Wisconsin Death Trip and some other. I don't know if any of you like are photo people who know other stories like this. There are a few, but I don't know. I'm flying blind, and I feel very lucky that anyone responded to this story at all. In the beginning, I was just like, well, this is clearly just a weird thing that, I'm very proud of the story, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to sell any copies. So now I'm going to go back to trying to be a screenwriter. But I was, luckily, I was wrong, and very slowly in the beginning it sort of took off, and it didn't go away. It was sort of like a bad cold. It just hung on, and people kept being like, hey, I read your book, and I'm like, still? It came out a month ago. I figured you would have forgotten about it by now, but no, it's been this sort of slow growing thing where it started small and just got a little bigger and a little bigger, and it's people are still saying, hey, I just read the first book, and I'm like, still? Cool, awesome, so it's growing, and I don't know what's responsible for it, but I'm just happy to be along for the ride. So I'll ask you questions now. Well, I will, but that would be awkward. Tell me about your hair. It's really cool. What color is that?